We should be streaming. Uh, Let me just close this window. Okay, cool. Let's start talking. Apush podcast. So the pages we're talking about, I accidentally showed it on screen. But we're gonna do 407 to 435. Starting with talking about manifest destiny, and then talking about compromise and conflict. So John Tyler um, became a the vice. He was the vice president. And he became president without campaigning, obviously, and that was due to William Henry Harrison dying just a month into office. Um, what does William Henry Harrison actually look like? Um, that's a good question. 1 second. Pull up an image of him. Shoot, can't zoom. It was tiny. Yeah, yeah, this is good. Okay, as you guys see, this is what he looked like. This is William Henry Harrison, but he died really early on. So John Tyler took over the presidency, and Tyler was part of the Whig Party, but he wasn't really a Whig. He was more like a Democrat, and he vetoed a lot of the Whigs' policies, like a new national bank, and was kind of kicked out of the party. So he became a president without a political party, and his cabinet, a lot of them just resigned because they were aligned with Harrison's ideas. In the early 1840s, there was a lot of dispute over the boundaries of Britain, the boundary of Maine, to be precise. Um, the, the 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 border, the famous border that we have today between Canada and the United States, was sort of formed from this conflict. Uh, and there's apparently a war called the Aroost. There's a war called the what was it, Aroostook War? Yeah, it was it was basically largely bloodless, no actual combat. It was resolved through diplomatic negotiations. Um, so they revolved things with the Webster Ashburn Treaty. Uh, is that the same Webster that draws the dictionary? No, apparently not. That's a different one. No, it's Noah Webster. Okay. But anyway, uh, let's talk about Texas. So Texas eventually declared independence from Mexico in 1836. But annexing it into the United States was a little bit controversial, and they wanted to be admitted as a slave state. Um, Let me just make sure there's the right pages. Yeah, okay. They wanted to be admitted as a slave state, rather than a non-slave state. So that was a little bit controversial, and because it was below the 40th, 49th parallel. I mean, it was below the 49th parallel, so people were like, yeah, it should be a slave state. But Mexico thought it was an act of war because the Texans really they kind of just like ended up moving into the Spanish Mexican territory. The Mexicans had a low population; they were happy to do so. And then they slowly fought with the Mexicans and eventually took over their own territory, which is like a little bit kind of the Texans thought. I mean, the Mexicans obviously thought it was deceitful. President Tyler um, decided to uh, annex Texas, and it passed in 1845. They entered the Union. A lot of Americans were traveling the Oregon Trail, trying to find rich farmland, and the U.S. and Britain both like sort of occupied Oregon, but the population wanted the American claim. As you guys know, there's a famous claim, 5440 or fight. I think it's 5440, but the 49th parallel was sort of the. Sorry, I said 49th parallel. It was the which parallel was the Missouri Compromise? As you can probably tell, I need to do some A push review. 3630 parallel, 38th parallel. There's a 38th parallel, and the Oregon Trail. Yeah, if you ever played the video game, the Oregon Trail is pretty fun too. Um, anyway, James K. Polk was elected in 1844, and he had a couple plans. Let's do a couple things. The tariffs, let's lower those tariffs. Um, let's look at Oregon and be like, let's clean that up. We'll buy up a lot of the Mexican territories or kind of force the Mexicans to sort of give us the territories for money. And the last thing was let's bring back the treasury and let's make it independent. Polk wanted California, but obviously Mexico didn't really want to sell. California was a nice piece of land, and they had no reason to need the money. So American troops moved into the contested area between the Rio Grande, like the Texan borders, basically the Rio Grande River, and they just moved in, and Mexican forces attacked, and Polk went to Congress and claimed American blood is spilled. So when they said American blood is spilled, that's basically the equivalent to saying like we've been attacked, we need to fight. It's very emotionally moving, and eventually there's the Mexican American War. So a couple of key key victories helped the United States win. Mexicans fought very very viciously, and if you've ever seen the cries like especially around Arizona, you see the famous cries like "Remember the Alamo." I believe that occurred during the thing. Like the Mexican troops, uh, yeah. So a lot of Texans died during the Alamo, and Americans are often, but a lot of the Texans actually just wanted slavery, which is kind of crazy. Um, but the Alamo is a big part of like getting public support because, for example, famous people interviewed all the non-combatants and were like, "What happened during this war?" And they painted a picture that was very emotionally moving to Americans. And the American won at Buena Vista. They won by Zachary Taylor. He won a great victory, and General Winfield, General Scott won captured Mexico City. And once you capture the capital, it's pretty much over in a war. So the United States won this one. So the war ended with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and Mexico lost the whole Southwest. The United States paid 15 million, and the boundary became the Rio Grande River as it is today. If you've ever gone to Texas, the reason Texas is shaped like that is because of the rivers. In America, basically, if you took its initial size and its new size, it's basically as if you're multiplying its size by 4/3. So the problem was a couple of things. Is this new land, if we admit them as, should we admit them as states? If we are going to admit them as states, should we allow them to have the institution of slavery? Many Northern Democrats consider slavery a moral ill that was degrading and defiling society, while the Southerners viewed it often as a way of life, and they viewed slavery as a positive, not a negative institution, not only as a very slightly negative institution, but rather a positive institution that brought good societal change. They considered their slaves to be needing their masters. They had other justifications for doing so. The local Mexican residents, the actual people who were originally in California, and some of the Native Americans that were allowed to stay there, they were quickly just like marginalized. They were brought to the side because these new Americans, these new settlers, were moving in. So eventually, there's this idea of popular sovereignty, and this is a really common idea that results in obviously things known as plebiscites, where people vote for where a large number of people they vote for what they think should happen. There are plebiscites on whether should this land be a slave land. I mean, have the institution of slavery? Should it allow slavery or should it not? Should it be a slave state or not? And these types of things are often decided by plebiscites. Another thing that plebiscites were, I'm pretty sure after, um, there's like this really famous case where the League of Nations after World War II, they actually have a plebiscite in a land known as Upper Silesia, which is really famous. The League of Nations obviously was largely inefficient, but it was successful in Upper Silesia, where it organized a plebiscite to decide the distribution of land um, between two countries, the Poland and I believe it's Germany. I googled it just now, and yeah, it was Poland and Germany. Some of the other victories of the League of Nations obviously was the polio vaccine and even the Åland Island disputes between Norway and Sweden. But that's getting a little bit off topic. uh, okay, so everyone loved popular sovereignty, and eventually the Whigs eventually elected the general who won the Battle of Buena Vista, General Zachary Taylor. He had not too much political experience, but he was a war hero, which means that his name was famous among the people, and they all liked him. In 1848, there was the Sutter's Mill, was where they found a gold nugget and a large quantity of gold, apparently, and this triggered the gold rush, where people moved. It's very famous that people say during a gold rush, the people making money were the shovels because the gold wasn't crazy amounts of available, and a lot of people didn't make it very well. And the Underground Railroad is pretty simple. That's the next topic. The Underground Railroad is basically just it was this area. It was just basically this. It wasn't a real railroad, obviously. It was sort of these pathways and this general path for slaves to escape to the north. And Southern politicians were like, we need to increase the fugitive slave law to bring slaves who escape to the north back to the south, while Northerners sometimes turn a blind eye to allow this thing to escape to happen. A couple more. Let's talk about the Senate's uh, the Senate's there's this um I just want to make sure this is like accurate, but there's this thing called the Great Triumvirate. There were these three statesmen who dominated American politics: Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and John C. Calhoun. Daniel Webster was the same Daniel Webster that signed Webster, the Webster or something treaty that basically that set the boundary between Oregon, sorry, not American territory from Maine to between Maine and Canada. That is what I mean to say. Okay, so basically they gathered for one. So they were like, so a lot of the triumvirate sort of gathered together, uh, and they wanted to sort of see how we can sort of unite the country, because here's what Wikipedia says: the time these three men spent in the Senate represents a time of rising political pressure, especially in the matter of slavery. So they each represented three respective parts of the United States. Clay represented these. John C. Calhoun represented the Western settlers. Henry Clay, the Northern businessmen, and Daniel Webster, the Southern slaveholders. So the fact that the debates leading to the Compromise of 1850 uh, were were one of the last contributions of the Great Triumvirate. Um, Compromise of 1850 basically said a couple of things. Will allow California to enter the Union. New Mexico and Utah, on the other hand, we shall keep them and have a plebiscite and decide through popular sovereignty how they will be ruled. California, on the other hand, will be a free state. This fugitive slave law will be strong. We want to make sure the Southerners are happy, but the slave trade will be abolished in the District of Columbia, the capital, and Texas can be given a little bit of money for its boundary concession. Now, this is what you call putting Band-Aid on an issue. Putting Band-Aid on a I want to think of a nice metaphor for this. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a volcano. It's simply just not going to work. Like momentarily, yes, the Union has been saved. Long term, there's a lot of trouble ahead because these same issues are going to come up. President Taylor died rather abruptly, so Millard Fillmore took over and helped pass the compromise. But the Whig Party just started fracturing. The Southern Whigs started fracturing, and finally, a new party arises: the Republican Party. The U.S. continued looking outward. They wanted to buy Cuba potentially. They tried to expand to the Pacific, especially in the Philippines, and they dreamed of a transcontinental railroad across the United States, which we have now. There's this famous Gadsden Purchase, which is like a southern strip, I believe, in near Arizona. This piece of land that we bought, I can pull up a picture. Uh, it's sort of the final land we got from Mexico. Final piece of land that we got from Mexico. Okay, let's see. Okay, boom. I can make it even bigger. Boom. Okay, now you can't see my face. Okay, but the Gadsden purchase was this piece of land right here. Wait, wait, this way. Yeah, right here. Um, as you can see, the it was like sort of this Bonner strip of Arizona, a little bit of New Mexico in there, but it was this piece of land that we needed to sort of have the union be successful. Okay, I'm already over time. I'm going so slow. Okay, I need to talk quickly. Douglas, Kansas, then Douglas's Kansas, Nebraska as was the match. Stephen Douglas wanted a Northern Railroad basically meeting, and Kansas, and he wanted to split the Nebraska territory into Kansas and Nebraska, and both organized slavery via popular sovereignty. But the Missouri Compromise had banned slavery north of 3630, and Douglas Act repealed it. The result was that Southerners were happy, the Northerners were crazy angry, and Congress had sort of legislated the startings of the Civil War. I'm so sorry that it took so long. But yeah, that's gonna be the end. Oh shoot, I have to talk about how do I how what was the thing I can most relate to? To be honest, this is not really relatable at all. Nothing here was very relatable because it was on the level of civilizations, and it's hard for me to like relate to anything that happened in my lifetime that was very similar. I mean, Mexican American War, I can't remember anything too similar. Political triumvirate, that thing, I can't remember. I can't see any political triumvirates that are happening here. But there was a political triumvirate of the Roman Empire, but unfortunately, I'm not a Roman, so uh, I suppose, yeah, misunderstandings with the Mexican American War caused a lot of the things. So I think in my life I have a lot of misunderstandings as well. Uh, so the thing I can most relate to was the Mexican American War, I guess. Um, what's the second question? Shoot, caught the second question. Uh, it's still showing the thing for me. Stop showing that. Sorry, I'm like frantically checking the Apush like how to complete the artifacts thing because um are the questions on there right away from pattern? Okay, I'll just reflect on things. I'm so sorry. I forgot the second question. I know it's how does it relate to your thing life? How do you relate to this? And what was your favorite part or something? I'll just answer that. My favorite part of the thing was my favorite part. Well, this was the political triumvirate. I mean, fascinating to see how three ones were representing different parts of the United Union, but then they were so powerful and they were so oratory masters. They managed to keep their power in the Senate for so long. And the final thing I'll answer is like, what do I think will happen in the future? Yeah, yeah, that's a question. What do I think will happen in the future? Well, that is a good question. I believe that well, the principal thing that will be happening in the future is that this debate over slavery will intensify and obviously into the Civil War. I think just through my prior knowledge, it's not really a prediction, but rather a guarantee that will happen due to, as Americans, we're intimately aware of the Civil War. It's like very present in the American ethos. So, also, my prediction is that the Civil War will happen.